Chapter 7. But Marya Alexandrovna was led by her good genius. The project she was planning was a grand and daring one. To marry her daughter to a wealthy man, to a prince and to a wreck. To marry her without anyone's knowing it, taking advantage of the feeble-mindedness and defenselessness of her guest. To do this by stealth like a thief, as Marya Alexandrovna's enemies would say, was not only bold but audacious. It was, of course, a profitable scheme, but in case of failure the schemers would be covered with disgrace. Marya Alexandrovna knew this, but she did not despair. "You don't know what storms I have weathered unharmed," she had said to Zina, and she had spoken truly. Otherwise she would not have been much of a heroine. There is no disputing that all this was something like highway robbery, but Marya Alexandrovna did not take much notice of that. On that score she had one wonderful and unfailing reflection. Once married, you can't be unmarried. A simple thought, but alluring the imagination with such extraordinary advantages that the mere conception of them sent thrills and shudders all over her. Altogether she was in great excitement, and sat in her sledge as though she were on thorns. Like a woman of inspiration with an unmistakable creative gift, she had already formed a plan of action. But this plan was still a rough sketch, altogether en grande, and still loomed somewhat dimly before her. A mass of details and unforeseen possibilities of all sorts awaited her. But Marya Alexandrovna had confidence in herself. She was agitated not by fear of failure. No! She longed only to begin the fray as soon as possible. Impatience, a laudable impatience, fired her at the thought of delays and obstacles. But as we are speaking of obstacles, we will ask leave to explain our meaning more fully. The chief trouble Marya Alexandrovna foresaw and expected was from her excellent fellow citizens, and especially from the highly respectable ladies of Mordasov. She knew by experience their implacable hatred for herself. She was perfectly certain, for instance, that at that moment every one in the town probably knew of her designs, although no one had been told anything about them. She knew from bitter experience on more than one occasion that no incident, even the most private nature, happened in her house in the morning without being known by the evening to the humblest market-woman, the humblest individual sitting behind a counter. Of course, Marya Alexandrovna, so far, had only a presentiment of trouble, but such presentiments had never deceived her. She was not deceived now. This was what had actually happened, though she knew nothing positive about it. About midday, that is, just 3 hours after the prince's arrival in Mordasov, strange rumors were circulating about the town. No one knew where they had begun, but they spread instantly. All began assuring one another that Marya Alexandrovna had already made a match between the prince and her Zina, her portionless 23-year-old Zina, that Mozgliakov had been dismissed, and that it was all signed and settled. What was the cause of these rumors? Could it be that everyone knew Marya Alexandrovna so well that they instantly hit on the very center of her secret thoughts and ideals? Neither the incongruity of such a rumor with the usual order of things, for such affairs can very rarely be settled in an hour, nor the obvious lack of any foundation for the story, for no one could discover whence it had arisen, could shake the conviction of the people of Mordasov. The rumors grew and took root with extraordinary obstinacy. What is most remarkable is that they began to circulate at the very time when Marya Alexandrovna was beginning her conversation with Zina on that very subject. So sharp are the noses of the provincials. The instinct of provincial newsmongers sometimes approaches the miraculous, and of course there is some reason for it. It is founded on the closest and most interested study of one another, pursued through many years. Every provincial lives, as it were, under a glass case. There is no possibility of concealing anything from your excellent fellow citizens. They know you by heart. They know even what you don't know about yourself. The provincial ought, one would think, by his very nature, to be a psychologist and a specialist on human nature. That is why I have been sometimes genuinely amazed at meeting in the provinces not psychologists and specialists on human nature, but a very great number of asses. But that is aside. That is a superfluous reflection. The news was like a thunderclap. A marriage with the prince appeared to everyone so advantageous, so dazzling, that even the strangeness of the affair did not occur to anyone. We will observe one other circumstance. Zina was almost more hated than Marya Alexandrovna. Why, I cannot tell. Possibly Zina's beauty may have been partly the reason. Perhaps the fact, too, that Marya Alexandrovna was anyway recognized as one of themselves by all the ladies of Mordasov. She was a berry off the same bush. If she had vanished from the town, who knows, they might have regretted her. She enlivened their society by her goings-on. It would have been dull without her. Zina, on the contrary, behaved as if she were living in the clouds and not in Mordasov. She was somehow not on a level with these people, not their equal, and, possibly without being aware of it, behaved with insufferable haughtiness in their company. And now, all of a sudden, that Zina, concerning whom there was a scandalous story, that proud, that haughty Zina, was becoming a millionaire and a princess, was rising to rank and distinction. In a couple of years, when she would be a widow, she would marry a duke or maybe a general, who knows, perhaps a governor. And the governor of Mordasov was, as luck would have it, a widower with a great weakness for the fair sex. Then she would be the lady of the greatest consequence in the province, and of course the mere thought of that was insufferable, and no news could ever have aroused more indignation in Mordasov than the news of Zina's marrying the prince. Instantly a furious outcry rose on all sides. People declared that it was wicked, positively vile, that the prince was out of his mind, that the old man was being deceived, that they were taking advantage of his feeble-mindedness to deceive him, to dupe him, to cheat him, that the old man must be saved from their bloodthirsty claws, that it was robbery and immorality, and finally that other girls were just as good as Zina, and other girls might just as well marry the prince. All these objections and opinions Marya Alexandrovna so far only surmised, but that was enough for her. She knew for certain that everyone, absolutely everyone, was ready to do everything possible, and even impossible, to frustrate her designs. Here they were trying to kidnap the prince so that she would have to get him back by force. Besides, if she did succeed in catching the prince and luring him back, she could not keep him forever on the lead. Besides, who can guarantee that that day, within a couple of hours, the whole solemn conclave of Mordasov ladies would not be sitting in her drawing-room, would not call on her on some pretext which would make it impossible to refuse to see them. If they were refused admittance at the door, they would climb in at the window, a feat almost impossible, though it did happen in Mordasov. In short, there was not an hour, not a second to be lost, and meanwhile nothing had yet been begun. All at once an idea that was a stroke of genius flashed upon Marya Alexandrovna's brain and was instantly matured there. Of that new idea we shall not neglect to speak in its proper place. Here we will only say that at that moment our heroine was dashing along the streets of Mordasov full of menace and inspiration, resolving even upon actual violence should it prove necessary in order to get the prince back. She did not yet know how it would be done and where she would meet him, but she did know positively that Mordasov would sink into the earth sooner than one jot of her present plans should fail of accomplishment. Her first step could not have been more successful. She succeeded in waylaying the prince in the street and taking him back to dinner. If I am asked how, in spite of all her enemy's devices, she managed to insist on getting her own way, so making Anna Nikolaevna look rather a fool, I am bound to say that I regard such a question as insulting to Marya Alexandrovna. Could she fail to triumph over any Anna Nikolaevna Antipov? She simply stopped the prince on his way to her rival's house, and in spite of everything, including the protests of Mozgliakov, who was afraid of a scandal, transferred the old gentleman to her sledge. It was this that distinguished Marya Alexandrovna from her rivals, that on critical occasions she did not hesitate for fear of a scandal, taking as her motto that success justifies everything. The prince, of course, made no great resistance, and, as usual, quickly forgot all about it, and was highly delighted. At dinner he babbled away without ceasing, was exceedingly lively, made jokes and puns, began telling anecdotes which he did not finish, or jumped from one story to another without being aware of it. At Natalia Dmitrievna's he had drunk 3 glasses of champagne. At dinner he drank more, and was completely fuddled. Marya Alexandrovna herself kept filling up his glass. The dinner was a very good one. The monster Nikita had not spoilt it. The lady of the house enlivened the party with the most fascinating graciousness. But the others, as though of design, seemed extraordinarily depressed. Zina maintained a sort of solemn silence. Mozgliakov was evidently put out and ate little. He was absorbed in thought, and as that was very exceptional with him, Marya Alexandrovna felt very uneasy. Nastasya Petrovna sat glum, and actually made signs to Mozgliakov, which the latter entirely failed to observe. Had it not been for the enchanting suavity and vivacity of the hostess, the dinner would have been like a funeral. Yet Marya Alexandrovna was inexpressibly excited. Zina alarmed her dreadfully with her mournful air and tear-stained eyes. And another difficulty was that there was need of haste, of prompt action, and that accursed Mozgliakov sitting on like a blockhead, troubling about nothing, and simply in the way. It was, of course, impossible to begin on such a subject before him. Marya Alexandrovna rose from the table in terrible uneasiness. What was her amazement, her delighted horror, if one may use such an expression, when, as soon as they arose from the table, Mozgliakov came up to her and suddenly, quite unexpectedly, announced that, to his great regret, of course, he was absolutely forced to take leave of them at once. "Where are you going?" Marya Alexandrovna asked with a note of extreme regret. "Well, you see, Marya Alexandrovna," Mozgliakov began with some uneasiness and even hesitation, "a very queer thing has happened to me. I really don't know how to tell you. For goodness' sake, give me advice." "Why, what is it?" My godfather, Borodoev, the merchant, met me today. The old fellow was quite huffy. He scolded me and said I had grown proud. This is the third time I have been in Mordasov without his having a glimpse of me. Come to tea today, he said. It is 4 o'clock now, and he drinks tea in the old-fashioned way, when he wakes up. What am I to do? It is a bore, of course, Marya Alexandrovna, but think, he saved my poor father from hanging, when he gambled away the government money. It was owing to that he stood godfather to me. If I am so happy as to marry Zinaida Afanasievna, I have only 150 serfs, while he has 1,000,000, people say, even more. He is childless. 70, think of it. If one pleases him, he may leave one 100,000 in his will. Oh, my goodness, what are you about? Why are you delaying? Cried Marya Alexandrovna, scarcely concealing her relief. Go to him, go to him. You must not let it slip. To be sure, I was noticing at dinner, you seemed so dull. Go, mon ami, go. Why, you ought to have paid a call in the morning to show that you appreciate, that you value his kindness. Ah, you young people, you young people! Why, Marya Alexandrovna, cried Mosgliakov in amazement, you yourself attacked me for that acquaintance. Why, you said that he was a peasant with a great beard, connected with innkeepers, low-class people, and attorneys. Oh, mon ami, we say a great many thoughtless things. I may make mistakes like anyone else. I am not a saint. I don't remember, but I may have easily been in that mood. Besides, you were not at that time paying your addresses to Zina. Of course, it is egoism on my part, but now I am forced to look at it from a different point of view, and what mother could blame me in the circumstances? Go, do not delay for a minute. Spend the evening with him, too. And listen, say something to him about me. Tell him that I have a great regard, a great liking, a respect for him. And do it tactfully, nicely. Oh, my goodness, why, it quite went out of my head. I ought to have thought to suggest it to you. You have quite reassured me, Marya Alexandrovna, Mosgliakov cried, enchanted. I swear I will obey you in everything now. Why, I was simply afraid to tell you. Well, goodbye, I am off. Make my apologies to Zinaida Afanasievna, though I shall certainly... I give you my blessing, mon ami. Be sure you speak of me to him. He certainly is a very dear old man. I changed my opinion of him long ago, though indeed I have always liked in him all those old-fashioned, truly Russian ways of his. Au revoir, mon ami, au revoir. Oh, what a blessing that the devil has taken him off. No, it was the hand of God helping us, she thought, breathless with joy. Pavel Alexandrovitch went out into the hall and was putting on his fur coat when Nastasya Petrovna seemed suddenly to spring from nowhere. She was lying in wait for him. "Where are you going?" she said, holding him by the arm. "To see Borodoev, my godfather, Nastasya Petrovna, who graciously stood sponsor at my christening. He's a wealthy old man. He will leave me something. I must make up to him." Pavel Alexandrovitch was in the best of spirits. "To see Borodoev? Very well, then, say good-bye to your bride," Nastasya Petrovna said abruptly. "How do you mean good-bye?" "Why, what I say. You imagine that she is yours already. Well, they are trying to marry her to the prince. I have heard it myself." "To the prince? Mercy on us, Nastasya Petrovna." "Mercy on us, to be sure. Now, wouldn't you like to look on and overhear? Put down your coat and come this way." Pavel Alexandrovitch, petrified, put down his fur coat and followed Nastasya Petrovna on tiptoe. She led him to the same little lumber room in which she had listened that morning. "But upon my word, Nastasya Petrovna, I really don't understand."
"Oh, well, you'll understand when you bend down and listen. The farce will begin at once, no doubt."
"What farce?"
"Shh! Don't speak so loud. The farce is that they are simply hoaxing you. This morning, when you had gone away with the prince, Marya Alexandrovna was a whole hour persuading Zina to consent to marry this prince. She said that nothing would be easier than to get round him and force him to get married, and she pitched such a fine tale that I felt quite sick. I overheard it all from here. Zina consented. How flattering they both were to you! They look upon you simply as a fool, and Zina said straight out that nothing would induce her to marry you. I am a fool, too. I meant to pin on a pink ribbon. Listen now, listen."
"But I say it's the most unholy treachery if so," whispered Pavel Alexandrovitch, looking into Nastasya Petrovna's face in the most foolish way.
"Well, you only listen, and that's not all you'll hear."
"But listen where?"
"Why, stoop down here, to this keyhole."
"But, Nastasya Petrovna, I am really not capable of listening at keyholes."
"Pooh, it's a bit late to think of that. It's a case of putting your honor in your pocket. Since you've come, you had better listen."
"But really—"
"If you are incapable of it, then be made a fool of. One takes pity on you, and you give yourself airs. What is it to me? I am not doing it for my own sake. I shall be gone from here before evening."
Pavel Alexandrovitch, overcoming his scruples, stooped down to the keyhole. His heart was beating. There was a throbbing in his temples. He scarcely understood what was happening to him.